What up, y'all? I'm Dr. CBS here with Dr. Ab, and you're tuned into episode 18 of The Last Dope Intellectual. So, Jared, today I want to shoot the shit about class reductionism. So this has been coming up in various ways, not least of which Gerald Horne just dropped some fire critiquing what he calls left-wing white nationalism. And so essentially he's making an argument not only about class reductionism, but also the ways in which the white left, we get started early, take a shot. The white left buys into U.S. mythology, right? U.S. and American exceptionalism. And so I just wanted us to kind of think with this piece called A Left Critique of Class Reductionism, that essentially is arguing, it makes a very interesting argument on two scores. One is that the actual identity politics is really white identity politics. And it talks about how like the Democratic Party harnessed the identity of white workers who conceive of themselves as middle class to narrow what counts as like the white worker, so that on the one hand, the Democratic Party can pretend that it appeals to the working class, but it's actually a very narrow swath that allows for the actual disintegration of the working class. And so, of course, the argument of class reductionists is that if you focus on race, gender, or other ascriptive categories, then you're breaking up class solidarity. But what this article shows is that it's actually more or less white folks who be doing that. White folks who take up their own identity politics to fracture the working class. And so let me just read the definition this person gives of class reductionism. This person says that class reductionism is the idea that universal demands that prioritize class interests have a better chance of being successful in mobilizing the working class than do demands connected to various racial, ethnic, and gender identities. And that universal working class demands avoid the identity reductionism that capitalist elites often use to divide workers by essentializing their racial, ethnic, and gender identities in a way that impedes working class unity. And so he cites Adolf Reed as a sort of paradigmatic class reductionist, essentially. So what do you think about all this? Are us Black leftists pointing out class reductionism and left-wing white nationalism? Are we undermining the revolutionary proletarian struggle? Like, what's good?
Well, I certainly don't see it that way. I mean, I think that what ends up happening, what I think this piece points to is that when, using my own comfort language, when the world majority point out the colonial aspect and the depths that brings to the setup, to the arrangement, to the relationship, it adds a complexity that I think, and that's always been the point for me that I've appreciated, that it brings a complexity to quote unquote traditional Marxism that I think I appreciate, that makes sense to me. So the reverse ends up happening where when in this case, the colonized African world, for instance, wants to remind everyone of that essential part of the broader extractive project, and all that means in terms of identity formation for both the colonized and the colonizer, the pushback becomes, or the sophisticated rebranding, in fact, becomes, as I think what this piece was saying or points to as part of the problem, a reactionary so-called identity politics that looks to play on those, I think, accurate colonial or colonized pronouncements in a very reactionary way to then, for instance, to say, as we might say, we're being colonized, to say, well, fine, well, then we'll throw you an Obama or a Kamala Harris or something like that. And then they reduce identity politics to that, when I think we're saying, no, we want our identity as colonized people to be recognized and be understood as part of this formula that we try to put together to understand what the problem is and how to respond to it. So anyway, I don't know if I'm happy to hear you respond or clean any of that up or correct any of that, but that was in many ways how I was, reacting or interpreting the piece.
Yeah, and I feel like it's often misinterpreted, or identity politics is represented as I'm in this body, therefore I deserve X, Y, Z, which I think is a liberal rendering of that. Just by being a Black woman, or just by being a trans person, or just by being, indigenous person, then I deserve these things because of my identity. But identity politics points out the structural realities of people who are racialized and gendered in the service of capitalist exploitation, right? So it's pointing out the ways that oppression constitutes particular forms of exploitation that accrue around different descriptive categories, so to speak, right? And so I'm not an intersectionality person. I think that obfuscates what Black communists been talking about when they were talking about triple oppression and triple exploitation long ago. But that notwithstanding, I think the idea is that, race is subjective and therefore it has less validity than class. But I think that especially in the context of the United States, and especially when you look at colonial relations, it's objective, right? It's objective in terms of its material realities. Yes, it's a social construct that people like to throw out willy-nilly. Yes, it is an ideological framework, but it actually has real material consequences in the same way as class, in my perspective. Like if you look at, so this is, again, I'm always talking about super exploitation. This is what these folks meant by super exploitation, that it's a form of exploitation over and above that of the white working class because of the realities of oppression. And so part of what I've been thinking about in my own abstract way is like Blackness as this category where oppression and exploitation cannot be pulled apart, such that Black exploitation is actually a particular form of oppression, and oppression is a particular means by which exploitation takes place. And so whatever, that's some theoretical shit. But in the final analysis, I think if we don't take into account these different descriptive categories, then we believe that the quintessential worker is the white male worker. But a simple, I think, contestation to that is like, if we understand the US now is a service-based economy, right? Whether from financial services down to the services that mostly racialized people and women perform to support and sustain the lifestyles of people in financial services, then we know that those workers are largely racialized immigrant labor and women. And therefore, if this is the way that the economy is constituted, then those should be the people that we're looking at when we're thinking about organization. Yeah, if we're thinking about what demands to be made, et cetera. And so I think that that's what identity politics points out. So, and class reductionism completely misses that, right? Because they're arguing that these things are just ideological, or these things are secondary. And I think that if you understand that we live in a racial capitalist, settler colonial, imperialist society, you cannot see those things as secondary.
Again, as I oversimplify it for my own sake, if at this point, I almost don't care beyond the intellectual exercise or the importance of trying to understand some history, sort of the chicken or the egg point. Did capital create this, or is this something else, or is it its own thing at this point? And what I'm interested in is sort of what the piece ends with when it says, these books should be a lesson to sections of the U.S. left that view identity politics as a politics that elevates categories of oppressed people, of oppressed groups ahead of the broader interests of the working class. In fact, the actual use of identity politics by corporate Democratic Party PR consultants has often been in the opposite direction, to negate the interests of the most oppressed sections of the working class, whose views, opinions, and material circumstances mean that they do not matter to these consultants. So as I'm just trying to say, I may recognize myself as part of the African community, but that does not mean you can just throw me any African and expect me to follow suit. So
yeah, so us Black folks, we be reading Marx, but we also be reading Rodney and Cabral and Claudia and Harry Haywood, Sin Ketamaya and others. So that's, and I think that all of that is necessary. And so, and just, this idea that if you satisfy all the sort of universal needs of the working class, which also often means white working class, then like that will resolve the issues of all groups. We just know that's not the case, especially because of fucking white supremacy, because often when those things have been resolved, it's been to the detriment of racialized, particularly Black people, right? It's been resolved in the interest of excluding other groups from those benefits, right? And so it's been a way that what Gerald Horne and I'm sure others call like cross-class collaboration has happened, right? And so we'll make these particular concessions to sort of mollify or to de-radicalize particular movements and give it to a certain group, often white folks, but not other groups, right? To undermine solidarity and these sorts of things. But also, I've been listening to David Roediger's Wages of Whiteness. It's fine so far, but part of what he talks about is that like these quote unquote ideologies of whiteness are not just created by the ruling class, they're created by the working class too. And that working class people are invested in fucking white supremacy, not because they're duped by the bourgeoisie, but because they're fucking racist. Because the US is a racist settler colonial capitalist society, like constitutively. And so it's not just shenanigans of the ruling elite, like the working class is very much invested in it, such that I'm sure a plurality, if not a majority of the white working class would be fine if they got benefits, but that didn't accrue to the rest of the workers, the workers who are super exploited and from whom super profit are generated, which to me is the sort of crux of the epoch of capitalism that we're in. And so, I don't know. I like Adolf Reed, man. I do. Like, there's so much that I learned from him. There is so much. But and I never read Reed. I never read Reed as saying race doesn't matter. I don't think that that's his position ever. But sometimes the universalism, the class universalism, be a little bit OD. Also, he don't got no international analysis. So.
You know what? I can't. I don't even think I've even heard that brought up in a criticism of him. That's interesting.
I brought it up on This Is Revolution when what is his name? Pascal Robert. I should know. I was on the show. Robert. Well, I was on his show and I brought that up. Like, he ain't got no international. He doesn't have an international analysis. So, and I think that's important. Again, when we understand that this is a settler colonial imperialist society.
No, I think
on top of being a racial capitalist one.
Yeah, I would think that would have to be a given, but okay. Yeah, no, I mean, again, I think Reed is great. I just think on some issues in some areas, we all have blind spots or areas of disagreement. And I think, that's cool too. So I wouldn't ever advocate that people ignore Reed. I just think we have to read beyond Reed.
Read beyond the reads, because Teray be saying some shit too. Beyond the reads. I like his work on the Urban League. He has a good critique, I think, of the Urban League. But sometimes it's kind of like, I agree with their critique of the Black bourgeoisie, but I feel like they go real, real hard on the race and the nationalism stuff. And not as hard on the racist ass white working class. That's not to say all white workers are racist, but enough are that I think that they need to be held to the same type of account as like the Black bourgeoisie, the niggerati, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm still, I think I'm just stuck on your point about Reed. I have to let that catch up. Okay.
Well, anyway, I'm sure the chat is alight with wonderful insights. So can't wait to see what our LDIers got to say about this. All right, y'all. So for this segment of Top 5 Dead or Alive, which is a segment where I and or Jared will list our top 5, or at least the top 5 that come to mind of a given subject, topic, issue, theme, or happening. And I want to give my top 5 of the Black Agenda Review, which is a feature on the Black Agenda Report that I actually co-edit with the amazing Dr. Jemima Pierre and the wonderful Dr. Peter James Hudson. And so let me just read a little bit about what our aim and scope was. So this actually dropped in, I want to say December was our first post, and it's been going strong weekly ever since. So we write in the piece, the Black Agenda Review, a manifesto of first principles. Yep, dropped December 2nd, 2020. The Black Agenda Review begins with our recognition of the profound and urgent need of a kind of preliminary political education that can prepare readers for the type of trenchant analysis Black Agenda Report has given and continues to give us. A Black forum for radical ideas, interventions, and criticism, the Black Agenda Review will function as a weekly supplement to the regular editorial content of the Black Agenda Report. While Black Agenda Report focuses largely on contemporary politics and current events, the Black Agenda Review will take a longer historical and more explicitly educational perspective, offering an in-depth examination of the political, economic, and socio-cultural issues that have emerged in and from the history of global Black struggles. In doing so, the review will be proactive in outlining and examining the themes, topics, and debates of concern to the Black radical left, and will avoid reactive and reactionary responses to issues deemed important by the mainstream corporate-driven media. It will also revisit the books, statements, speeches, and manifestos that have served as the deep historical, intellectual, and political archive, informing the weekly editorials, analyses, and commentary of the Black Agenda Report. So that is what we set out to do. I had a conversation with Glenn Ford at a certain point where I was like, it's a lot of stuff that's appearing in various places on Black Agenda Review that are not necessarily radical Black left. And so I really wanted to see how I could contribute to shore up that radical Black flank. And so he was with it. And so I hit up Jemima and Peter like, hey, would y'all be interested in doing this? We kind of met and conceptualized the idea for maybe a month, and then we launched it in December. And so I don't know how many people are aware of the Black Agenda Review, but I definitely wanted to put it in people's minds and let y'all know it's out here, and just point out what some of my favorite posts are from the Black Agenda Review, because there are over, I guess, probably at least 30, 40 posts at this point. So top 5, Dead or Alive, the Black Agenda Review. Let's go.
Okay. So number 5, racial capitalism, Black liberation in South Africa.
Yes. So I love this piece. We dropped this on December 16th, 2020. And basically, we wanted to comment on the South African origins of racial capitalism, which Peter has done extensive research on. And then we wrote a sort of discursive introduction that explains, that racial capitalism is everywhere, that it's often attributed to Cedric Robinson, but there's a longer South African history. And then we drop the piece, Nation and Ethnicity in South Africa by Neville Alexander, where he first introduces the idea of racial capitalism. And so you get our interpretation of the racial capitalism discourse, and then you get a sort of primary source of how Neville Alexander is conceptualizing racial capitalism from the South African context. Super dope, super amazing, great teaching text. So check that one out.
All right. So number 4 in your top 5 of the Black Agenda Review is Black Citizenship Forum, Black Citizenship and the Problem of Coloniality.
Yes. Okay. So we did a bunch of posts in our Black Citizenship Forum. And so I think there are about 6 or 7 posts. Layla actually did one. And so of all of those, my favorite was by one of my greatest teachers, Sabelo Ndlovu-Gashini. And he wrote about how the question of citizenship, especially on the African continent, is haunted not only by a formal colonial administration, but also what he calls coloniality, what many scholars call coloniality, which is a continuation of colonial relations after the end of formal colonial administration. And so some refer to this as neocolonialism, but coloniality is a whole nexus of structures that are material, political, ideological, epistemic, et cetera, that reproduce a colonial relationship. And Sabelo is particularly important because the coloniality idea comes from like Aníbal Quijano and Walter Mignolo and a bunch of people who articulate it from the Latin American perspective. But he articulates it to the African continent into the Black world more broadly. And so I really appreciate this piece. It was one of my favorites in that citizenship forum. But check this out and check out the whole forum in general. We got pieces by Ronaldo Walcott, Layla, as I mentioned, and a whole bunch of other people that I can't think of right now. But it's dope. Check it out.
So with this next one, I actually have the most mild familiarity and really enjoyed this one in particular myself. Anthropology, Racial Science, and the Harvesting of Black Bones. Dr. Michael Blakely, interviewed by Dr. Jemima Pierre. Yeah, a fascinating interview, and of course, unfortunately, timely given all that was going on with MOVE. But tell us a little bit about this one.
Yeah, so this dropped shortly after the revelation that the remains of Tree and Alicia Africa had been taken from the MOVE bombing site and kept first by University of Pennsylvania and then by Princeton. And so Jemima did an interview with a forensic anthropologist, Michael Blakely, who talked not only about that situation, but about the way that racial science informs forensic anthropology, how it reproduces dispossession and epistemic violence, and the ways that he has engaged in challenging those sort of colonial and racist foundations of forensic anthropology in his own work on Native American remains as well as African remains. And so it's long. It's really interesting, super insightful. And, it gives tremendous background and insight into why it is that those anthropologists would think it was okay to not only remove those remains without the permission of the Africa family, but also keep them and then misplace them for all of these years.
Similarly, this next one, I also found a particular interest, given that I am still trying to learn so much about Black engagement with anarchism. So this piece here I thought was of particular interest again to me. And but tell us about this on anarchism and the Black Revolution.
Yes. So this is a long form essay by Peter that dropped on March 31st, 2020. And like you, I love this so much. And I ranked it second on my list because I also knew very little and continue to know very little about Black anarchism. And, Peter and Jemima identify as anarchists and, they got a little bit of smoke for Marxism Leninism. I'm still firmly in the Rodneyist, which to me is the Black Marxist Leninist camp. But there was so much that I read in this piece that really resonated with what my understanding and my application of Marxism Leninism is. And it really sheds insight on sort of what is after socialism. Because as we know, communism is the withering away of the state. And so, and anarchism, is, against sort of the state, state organization and how the state corrupts radical movements, right? And so, of course, it's interesting, like so many other of our ideologies, a lot of Black anarchism comes together in prisons from incarcerated intellectuals. And so, Lorenzo Urban. And so I learned a lot from this essay. It inspired me to continue to learn about Black anarchism. I actually found a video on YouTube that was posted recently about Black anarchism from a Trini fellow that I'm going to check out. But I loved learning more and it really piqued my interest. And so I highly recommend folks who don't know very much about anarchism, or even if you know everything about white anarchism, but didn't realize there was Black anarchism, this essay is amazing. It's written, it's beautifully written. Peter's a very beautiful writer, and it's really informative and got a bunch of receipts in there. So check it out.
All right. So, well, the number one for this top five, you have here, of course, given your work with BAP and BAP's coverage of this, it makes perfect sense. But this issue has been, again, unfortunately big this year. But the 10 Commandments of Democracy in Haiti, going back to September 25th, 1991, a very important moment. But please tell us about that.
Yes. So we posted this in the context of when the uprisings and the general strike in Haiti were taking off in response to the perfidy, the fuckery of Jovenel Moise. And so we wanted to highlight was that this has a much longer history. Of course, it goes back to 1804. 1915, but in this 1990s moment is really important because this was the first overthrow of Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was the first democratically elected leader in Haiti. And so this particular piece is a speech he gave before the United Nations, shortly before he was overthrown, and it lays out the Lavalas ideology as well as the way that he sees Haiti positioned in the international community and what the Haitian people are owed, both from the state, but also from the international community. And so it's beautiful and amazing. And it reminded me a lot of like the non-aligned movement principles of the Bandung Conference principles, of the Tricontinental Conference principles. And I just, I try to write that in the introduction, but they didn't like that. So the introductions, we write our collective and a lot of my shit gets edited out. That's okay though. But but I saw it as part of that milieu and part of like that conversation. And so I just think everything he has to say is amazing. There's a critique of global capitalism, of imperialism, of neoliberalism and structural adjustment, all those things. And so it's such an informative piece. It's such a powerful speech. And so I highly recommend that. I mean, I highly recommend everything that comes out of the Black Agenda Review, but these are my personal top five. These are pieces that I enjoyed reading. I enjoyed co-writing the introduction for, and that I think I've learned the most from. So check out the Black Agenda Review. It drops every Wednesday, every week, alongside Black Agenda Report. And you can also follow the Black Agenda Review on Twitter at Agenda Review. So tap in. All right, y'all, for this segment of Left Disquisition, where I talk about what's being talked about, discussed, analyzed, commented on, or critiqued on the platforms I learned from, I am joined today by two very dope people to talk about Keith Davis Jr. So first, we got Belfina Yawan, who is a Baltimore-based writer, abolitionist, and restorative practice practitioner born in Liberia, West Africa. Her work is concerned with the uses of memory for Black folks, how we inherit it, how we preserve it, and how we pass it down. Yawan is a curator of the online library, The Womanist Reader, and a collective member of the interdisciplinary publishing initiative Press. She has recently launched Archive Liberia, a personal archival project chronicling Liberian history. And then we got friend of the show, Erica Kane, who is a poet, writer, and organizer in Baltimore and the DMV. She is a coordinating committee and outreach team member of the Black Alliance for Peace, as well as an outreach member of the Black Working Class Centered Ujima People's Progressive Party in Maryland. Keynes is the founder of Liberation Through Reading program that provides Black children with books that represent them, and created the extension, a book club entitled Liberation Through Reading BC, to strengthen political education online and in our communities. She is also the co-editor of the African revolutionary blog Hood Communist. So welcome, Belfina and Erica.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Of course, y'all. So I just want to talk about all things Keith Davis Jr. So if any of our viewers have been living under a rock and don't know about the Keith Davis Jr. case, can you please tell us what transpired, why he is heading into a fifth trial, and where everything stands right now?
So I always start by letting folks know, because Keith's case is now an open case, I can talk about it limited. I can't use as many names and give as many details, but I will do my best to make sure that you all have the important facts. So June 2015, June 7th, 2015, Keith Davis Jr. was misidentified as a robbery suspect. He was chased into a garage by 4 Baltimore police officers, and then he was shot at over dozens of times by these officers. It's important to note that after they shot him dozens of times, they did not call for help because the assumption was that he was dead. And I think that was also the goal, that he would be dead. But Keith did not die. He lived. And they claimed that the reason why they had chased him into this garage was because he had just robbed a hack. While all of the charges involving that hack he was acquitted of them because the victim of that robbery said Keith was not the person that had done it. So ultimately, once again, the police officers still could not explain why they had chased and shot at Keith over a dozen times, right? After he was acquitted, a few days later, as Keith is like, cool, our family is like, it's time to come home. The state's attorney's office and Marilyn Mosby then claims that a gun that was found in the garage where Keith was chased into, that gun was traced to an earlier murder of a man named Kevin Jones. And that began the long ass haunting saga that we're at now of Keith, right? And so it has been 5 trials of the state's attorney attempting to make a guilty verdict stick, which it hasn't. On May 13th, 2021, the last conviction was overturned by Judge Sylvester Cox, which then granted Keith a new trial. And then the saga added a whole new element one Friday night. I keep giggling because I don't think I've come to terms with it yet. But Friday night, right before Memorial Day, Marilyn Mosby in her office then decides that she's going to add some new charges to Keith, and he is now being charged with attempted murder.
A hot mess. So just a quick follow-up. Why do you think this case hasn't gotten the national attention of Kim Kardashian or whatever other celebrities there are? And because this is clearly a travesty of justice, if there ever was one. Why is this case so controversial?
Erica, do you want me to jump in or you want to
jump in? I can start. So like as Belfina said, on the 7th it makes 6 years since the whole ordeal has started, since he was shot by the police. But what I think that the issues mainly stem from is that this happened just a few months after Freddie Gray. So we were still engulfed with the entire situation of Freddie Gray. And when the state's prosecutor made the charges, Keith's, whatever was going on with Keith and anybody else really in the city sort of took a back burner to the Freddie Gray case. But Marilyn Mosby, instead of going ahead and proceeding with trying those officers, let each and every one of them off, we're proceeding into the 5th trial for Keith Davis. So I can't tell you why it hasn't gotten national attention. I think it could have to do with Baltimore City being the city that it is, how people sort of neglect it or only understand it in one aspect, and it could also do with the popularity of the state prosecutor. So it's really hard to say why it hasn't gotten national celebrity attention, because it's really hard to get local attention on Keith.
Yeah. And the Marilyn Mosby has done a good enough job of where, while she doesn't really communicate or talk to local media, she talks to national media, right? That is where she stays. The Washington Post, you never see her at home doing interviews, answering any questions, writing op-eds. She don't want that. And so because of that, Marilyn Mosby has so eloquently created this brand around her in terms of national media. And it's like this smokescreen where no one from outside non-local media, even local media, ever questions her about her actual job. They only talk to her about Freddie Gray. They never pull her stats. They never talk to citizens. If you look at any of the press, any of the op-ed pieces that has been done around Marilyn Mosby, it all revolved around Freddie Gray. And so any other case, mind you, Keith happened right after Freddie Gray. And part of it, too, is the city of Baltimore was not about to go back into another uprising, right? When Keith happened in June, the uprising had just recently died down. Things were just becoming quote unquote normal. Politicians were just feeling quote unquote safe, right? The heat was a little bit off the police officers. And then here go Keith Davis Jr. They were not about to go back to that. And Keith was Baltimore's ultimate sacrifice, right? Where everyone from the state's attorney to the police department to the politicians to the judges to the clerks, all of them made that decision that Keith would be the sacrificial lamb so that Baltimore City would not go into another uprising and that the state would stabilize itself in that moment.
Right.
Wow. Man. So y'all did a press conference yesterday, an amazing press conference to shed more light, new light on Keith's case. So can you tell me a little bit about that press conference, why you decided to hold it at this time, and what you hope to accomplish with it?
So one of the things we knew was that Marilyn Mosby was very strategic in charging Keith the evening of Memorial Day weekend. It was a strategic move because, one, we know that the news cycle is quick. And so by the time you get to Tuesday, it's a whole new news cycle that's come. And she also knows that historically, the Baltimore Police Department and politicians love to criminalize Memorial Day weekend in Baltimore City. Every news article that you read is focused on the crime in the city, the violence in the city. And so I'm pretty sure her folks kind of figured this will be like at the last thing people will be talking about on Tuesday. And so the press conference was exactly to not just challenge that, but also we wanted to show the solidarity of the Black organizations that have been fighting for Keith. There's a lot of misconception about who Keith's supporters are. And because Marilyn Mosby has individualized Keith as just one person, what she's been able to do is essentially say that what is happening to Keith is not a larger reflection of anything structural, that it has nothing to do with the actual conditions of the city, that it's not attached to other things like the carceral system, right? That it's not an implication of multiple systems in the city. And instead, she just zones it down to it's just Keith. And yesterday, what I wanted to show was that Keith is connected to almost every struggle within Baltimore City right now. That Baltimore organizers, Black organizers have come together on his behalf, but also that the youth of Baltimore, right, who were teaching about justice and so forth, that they're actually watching as well. And so this was really just a moment to get it across. Lastly, in her, the Baltimore City Attorney Office referred to Keith Davis Jr. as a threat to public safety. And this press conference was to also question that, right? Like, how can you say that when you have an entire community that is saying, no, baby, we want him. He's ours. He's our somebody. So you need to bring him home. He's not a threat to us, right? And so that was the importance of that press conference. And it went so well. I'm so happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. And part with this, just sorry, Erica, to cut you off, but what it reminds me of is like, we need to defend people when they are alive and even if they don't get life. So his case is interesting because he did not get life and he didn't get sentenced to death and he wasn't murdered by the cops, even though they tried. He got 50 years. And so so we need to defend our people in life. You know, it's not just when they're murdered, not just when they're thrown under the jail, but in cases like this, which are gross injustices. And so that's part of my interest. And of course, I owe it all to you and Erica for bringing this to my attention. But that is why I think it's so important. And this is a true test for abolitionists, right? Mm-hmm. This is a real case that sort of brings those politics to the fore.
Because that's what we've been seeing and fighting, right? Where is that there has to be a deeper dive as folks, as organizers, into why is it that it's so easy for a lot of people to be able to defend the dead, right? That is such an easy thing for them to do, right? You have the mayor and other politicians who are releasing statements on George Floyd, right? Who are releasing statements on Breonna Taylor and releasing statements on all of these other Black people who have suffered at the hand of state-sanctioned violence and has lost their lives. But for some reason, here you have living, breathing person. And I don't want to just reduce it to Keith, because there are so many other Keiths that are in Baltimore City, and they're oftentimes abandoned because they did survive. And now what we have seen, I'm telling you, organizing around Keith for 6 years, is we have been yelling into the void of, how can you all see him in real time, a tangible person that we can touch, we can feel, that we can save in this lifetime? And yet everybody, all of a sudden, politics have gone out the window, right? Where you even have Black organizers in the city who are still like, oh, do we support Keith? Do we not support Keith? Or it's a matter of question and debate, rather than like, this is our political like commitment and this is where we're at.
Right. And particularly because Keith's case has become an issue of being a political prisoner, in the sense that it's a persecution. Last year, the theme of last year, when it was his 5 years, when we were doing the action, was for that Lucille Clifton. I didn't die. So, so we were praising that, that he survived, and it wasn't so much. It was like a celebration almost at the end. Like, we had our action, but we did have a celebration for Keith, because it was an entire summer of 2020 where we were, shouting all these names, saying all these names of people who had died, but Keith was still alive, and we were not fighting for the people who are still alive. And I think that was so important to bring back. And also, with the beauty of yesterday, I feel for me, that was the first time I can remember seeing different Black organizations come together. There was an instance where, well, it was 2 times really, where we don't have no permits. We running up on the courthouse with podiums and speakers and lights and 50 plus people, and we got news press up there. So about an hour in, it was about 12 or 15 cops on each side, and about an hour in, one of them felt froggy enough to try to stop us. Like, oh, what about a permit? What about a permit? And the way that we all circled in, like, to protect each other, like, no, you're not going to shut us off, and no, he's not going to stop speaking. And we did that multiple times. And for me, that was like a visual sort of solidarity that I can't remember seeing in that city, that I think was so important, because it was done without the Davis family needing to be there. And to see the optics of that, to see that it was organizing Black, and to see, the children of New Generation Scholar, to see the Morgan State students, Ujima, Bat was out there. And just to see, just to see that sort of solidarity in a city that sort of plays on these organizations individually. They pick us apart, which one they can use, which one they can, do their bidding, or maybe perhaps be their spokespeople. And yesterday was sort of a like, nope, and that's where it stops here. It's going to stop with Keith. And the other thing that I really value Belfina for is the press conference was just so vast that it brought up a whole bunch of issues. Like, I adore Bree. Brilliant youth. Like, I'm like, like, I'm so excited about the people that's coming up, all these young people that's coming up, because they have such a clearer politic than I can remember having at that time. It might not be refined, but it's clear, and they understand things that I don't think that I had the language for, and they have it. And to hear them saying it, and saying, how they could have easily gotten swept up in organizing a different way, but following Keith and following the actions that happened in Keith sort of shifted the way they were organizing, or made them understand that we don't really have to follow an organizing model, right? There's not like an organizing model for Baltimore City. It could look like anything, because we're all Baltimore City. And I thought that was so valuable to have. And also, it's very important to understand that Keith, a lot of the reasons why Keith, I don't want to say buried, but hasn't gotten so far, is because Marilyn Mosby, like a lot of progressive prosecutors, are able to make Keith a single issue case, right? So that's just one thing, as opposed to all the greater good that Marilyn Mosby is doing, right? And I think that in order to remove that, or like take away that veil that it's not a single issue case, is to bring in, well, how does someone get shot at over a dozen times by multiple police officers? None of them get charged, one of which is tied up in GTTF, and none of these things come up. So if that doesn't come up for Keith, you can imagine how many, there's probably a lot of people that are going through this and why. So we have to really question, well, who is training these police? And then we have to peel back, like, where's the funding actually coming from? And there's a lot of federal funding of policing going into Baltimore City. And Baltimore City, for all of the defund the police campaigns, the city council doesn't run that budget. So, so these are things that I think that even addressing Keith's case, we could talk about that. We get to talk about how a judge can say, I don't want to set the precedent. I don't want to be the one to let that go or let that pass, because that means that it's going to open a floodgate. Like, how can a judge say that? How can a state prosecutor get away with what she's doing? How can police shoot multiple times at one person who's unarmed and nothing happens to them? So I think that Keith really is a reflection of the politics of Baltimore City.
So do y'all think that the Keith Davis Jr. case would be getting more, or would be seen as the controversy or the tragedy that it is if Marilyn Mosby wasn't a Black woman and ostensibly a progressive prosecutor?
Child, okay. If Marilyn Mosby was not Black, and if identity politics did not have people by a chokehold, shackled, everything, shackles off their feet, baby, so you can dance, okay, we would not be here. We would not be here. If Marilyn Mosby was a white person, people would have been up in arms for Keith. They would have been able to make all of these connections. They would have been able to have these analyses and understand, one, the role of prosecutor and what its function is, and then how that role has functioned to cause more violence to this family. But because Marilyn Mosby is a Black woman, then there becomes this added, I don't even know what to call it, where it's like people brain cells just shrinks all of a sudden because they're seeing a Black person in that space. And then their analysis of violence and their analysis of the state just goes out the window, because then it becomes all about, well, if we have a Black prosecutor, that means we're building towards Black political power. And once again, I'm always asking the question of, what role does a prosecutor play in Black political power exactly? If we're working
power to do what? Power to what end? To oppress?
Thank you. You're gonna put up a Black prosecutor to build up Black political power to go fill up prisons with Black people. Like, what is as an abolitionist who is working towards a new world, there is no function for a prosecutor in that world. In the world where there is Black political power and Black power in general, I don't understand what the function of a prosecutor would be. And so it's just like, even the whole thought process of that. But that's what you have, right? When people's analysis begins and ends at race, and they don't bring in imperialism, they don't bring in capitalism, they don't bring in carceral system, they don't bring in any of those other elements, but they feel that race is the end all be all, and any other form of violence that exists in that person, it gets to be ignored simply because that race then covers all of it, right? And so you have a prosecutor who both demands the protection from anti-Black violence while at the same time perpetrating anti-Black violence. It's a very contradictory and gaslighting place to be on the receiving end of that.
And I think my first article that I've ever written on Keith was around the time of When They See Us. And I had to point that out, because if she was Linda, Keith would have been seen. Keith would be home. But it's just not even the issue of her being Black. Baltimore City is run by Black people and has consistently been ran by Black people. It's Black city council, it's Black mayors, it's Black police, it's Black judges, and they're all involved in Keith's case, So I think that opens people up to have a little more introspection about what does that even mean, because I think that people are just settling, especially in that city, for the idea that is as good as it can get, just Black representation. And they falsely equate that with Black political power. And then also there's a Black middle class in Baltimore City that has the reins on all of this shit. Like, honestly, on how politics is talked about in the city, on how politics is maneuvered in the city, because they do the wheeling and dealing amongst the politicians. So there's a business class in Baltimore that also protects a Marilyn Mosby. They do. So because she's a part of that whole misleadership class. So they protect one another. So it's really hard to penetrate that if you don't have that analysis, and if you are of the understanding that all skin folk are kinfolk, if you believe that, or if you believe in representation and, identity reductionism, then Baltimore City, you get what you get in Baltimore City, and you get issues and cases like Keith Davis Jr. continuously.
And I'm sorry to cut y'all off. I wanted to talk about like that protection barrier that's there. Recently, the Baltimore Sun editorial board released a piece after Marilyn Mosby was caught in the lie, throwing up her middle finger. And in the Baltimore Sun editorial piece, of course, as always, they defend Marilyn Mosby, don't even bring up the fact that she lied from the official state's attorney account, don't even bring up the fact that what does it mean for a prosecutor who is on video and knowing they're on video to still be bold enough to lie? How does that show up in the courtroom? They didn't even do that, right? Well, of course, we come to find out one of the Black women who is on the Baltimore Sun editorial board is married to Nick Mosby's best friend. And so they are in community with the Mosbys. That is, they see them as friends and family. And so if you look at the Baltimore Sun's history of how they've chosen to report on Marilyn Mosby, and you look at the relationship and you look at the editorial board where you have a Black woman who is like family to Marilyn Mosby, making sure that she is protected and that these journalists are not going out of left side reporting on her. And if we know this, Baltimore Sun editorial board can trump the journalists there. Like a journalist could write a piece, and the editorial board could come and be like, sorry, you was wrong. We disagree with you, right? And so that is like how connected and strong her protection barrier of other middle class Black people are, right? And it doesn't help. Once again, she's the second highest paid person, political figure in the city of Baltimore, right?
Yeah, and her husband is responsible for her budget as president of the city council. So, like, you see how that all.
Yeah, nepotism on top of the niggerati aspect. It's a lot. So I just wanted to turn attention to, you all did an event called 6 Years Later that focused not only on Keith, but connected it to programs like 1033 and was making the connections that you all spoke about earlier that were also mentioned at the press conference. And so you also put together a resource list. So can you talk about this resource list and how people can access it? And again, what are the connections that you're making using the Keith Davis Jr. case as just one manifestation?
Yeah, I can start. So we did a webinar or like a teach-in. We just wanted to not commemorate, but we wanted to honor what happened, the murder of Freddie Gray, but in a way that contextualized Baltimore City and policing and the policing issues, similar to what we just broke down. Like I said, Baltimore City is a city that is federally funded by policing. And my frustration has always been the ways that Congress has been able to skirt addressing federal funding, because they make it like, oh, it's a municipal issue, that's local, but they don't ever talk about things like the 1033 program or the Deadly Exchange or Operation Relentless Pursuit. All three exist in Baltimore City. And on top of, I think Operation Legion had like a stint during the summer. So all three of these federal policing programs exist in Baltimore City. So that should kind of help us understand how we get a Freddie Gray and how we get a Tyrone West and how we get a Keith Davis Jr. Because Tyrone West wasn't murdered by Baltimore City police. He was murdered by Morgan State police, and Morgan State University has a 1033 program budget. And we can't separate these things or act like none of these things matter or none of these things are issues. And Tyrone West is a case that Marilyn Mosby was supposed to take up. Like, you see what I'm saying? So nobody is calling out the federal policing that is engulfing the city. And on top of the spy plane, which I'm sure is no longer like the one that we knew about, is no longer in existence. They got that one off the table. The struggle for the Leo bill that's existed for years, that people are trying to make it seem like, it's only been a year or two that people have fought for it and we got a little bit. This has been a continuous struggle. Every year, people are trying to reform or take something away, because the Leo bill is the law enforcement officers protection bill, right? It's like a bill of rights, and it's several bills. It's not just one bill, it's multiple bills. So every year they try to chip away, activists try to chip away at it more and more each year, but it's still longstanding. It still protects police in this city and in the state of Maryland. And then also the crooked cop aspect of Baltimore City. Like, we invited the co-author of I Got a Monster, which is a great book if you ever want to learn about the GTTF and all that happened. Little fun fact, I went to high school with one of them. But yeah, if you ever want to learn about what happened, that's a great book. But we had him come on so he could just explain the culture of policing in Baltimore that exists. And again, one of those cops, well, not one of those direct cops that were prosecuted, but one of Baltimore City's police officers that got caught up in that is a part of one of the cops that was shooting at Keith Davis Jr. So we wanted to use that, the 6 years webinar to seamlessly make these connections that people have not been able to make or have not been making. Like shooting at somebody over a dozen times, that training is directly related to deadly exchange.
And even connecting, so the Law Enforcement Bill of Right Protection actually plays a huge part in Keith's case. The 4 officers that shot Keith Davis Jr. were never prosecuted, faced no accountability for Marilyn Mosby, despite the fact that the Baltimore City Civilian Review Board actually reviewed his case and filed complaints against those 4 officers for excessive force. And they deemed that Keith Davis Jr. was a victim. And of course, the state's attorney office completely ignored that. But she also never interviewed the folks that shot at Keith. And her reasoning at first was, well, they're protected under the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, which an officer has 10 days, right, before they are forced to give any testimony on what occurred. And so within that 10 days framework, a police officer in Baltimore City have the time to get that story together, get it real strong, get all their lawyers, all the little prosecutors on that case, so that by the time they get into that interview room, them 10 days, that story is going to be straight, right? And so we see that direct connection of how Keith got to this place, how something like the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights that we have been trying to get repealed for years, and that has been completely watered down, and it's not even what y'all could keep that. Like after they was done, I was like, y'all could just keep that at that point because they ain't gonna do nothing for us. But we see that, and then even the spy planes. We know that despite the fact that the spy planes are no longer here, which they were very noisy, okay, Baltimore citizens, we heard them. No one knows where the data is, right? So the city has not answered to all of that recording that they were getting up in the sky, because the spy plane also zooms in, okay? It zooms in. Nobody knows where that data is. No one knows what they're doing with that data. And that's another question of because the reason why they started it was to say that it will be preemptive crime. And so how many people are currently being criminalized because they're up on that spy plane? And despite the fact that the city is saying, oh, we're not using it anymore, baby, your data is in there. You done. Like you're in the system. Right? And so it's all of these connections that come together. And then lastly, you have, when we talk about Tyrone West, who was killed by a Morgan state police officers, and we know that Morgan is a HBCU. What a lot of people don't understand is in the state of Maryland, what you have is all of the universities in the state of Maryland who are under what they call the University System of Maryland. And that's just about every university, unless you're private, or some HBCUs don't fall under that. You are required by law, all of the appliances, furnitures, all of those things that are in every university in the state of Maryland were made in prisons. Universities are in direct contract with state and federal prisons. And so even down to the middle schools, high schools, whatever you flip a desk over, you're going to know what prison that thing was made in. And so it's like a direct tie. If we're using prison labor in universities, what do you think we're doing with cops? Like we're literally part of the carceral system already. And that's how over police Baltimore City is, where even the universities are not exempt from the carceral system.
Yeah, and we should say too, Baltimore City has 2 HBCUs. Taos will be trying it, but they have 2 HBCUs, Morgan and Coppin, and both have 1033 budgets. So they're both in the middle of communities, Black communities. So they're not like off the way. They're dead in the center of Black communities. Morgan on the east and Coppin on the west.
Which explains why I'm sure they have 1033 budgets. It's like University of Southern California, University of California at Berkeley, and on and on and on, the way that these universities are essentially like settler colonies in these Black neighborhoods, Columbia University, Penn State, or excuse me, University of Pennsylvania, et cetera, et cetera. So, wow, there's so many connections, and I'm so glad you all made them. So I recommend that everybody check out the webinar as well as the resource list, and we'll drop a link in the show notes. And so the last question I just want to ask is, how can we support the struggle to free, not only to free Keith Davis Jr., but primarily that, like censor that, but also to challenge and just bring light to all of these connections that you also brilliantly revealed?
So they're right now in Baltimore City. So tonight, actually at 7 p.m., we'll be doing collaborating on an event with the Free Ashley Now campaign for Keith. And it'll be a letter writing event, and where we'll be writing letters and emails to the Baltimore City Council people and the mayor around demands around Keith. But one of the things that a lot of people that we're trying to get at in terms of how we support Keith, of course, is that direct support of elevating Keith's name, donations, and that. But it's also, once again, are to the conditions, right? So one of the biggest factors we're talking about tonight is the city of Baltimore has a civilian review board for a reason, right? All of these things that popped up and the emphasis on the civilian review board came out of Freddie Gray and the uprising. And you had the city where they created this entire brand, including Marilyn Mosby, mayor's office, all of that around accountability. And so one of the demands we're asking tonight is the mayor, Marilyn Mosby, no one has responded to that civilian review board, right? No one has talked about the fact that Keith's peers, right? Marilyn Mosby she's always on radio talking about, well, he was found guilty by a jury of his peers. Well, a collective of his peers in the civilian review board. And what people don't actually understand at the time, the people that reviewed Keith's case, some of them were actually pro-police. And yet they filed these complaints, right? Like some of them were not on our side in terms of wanting abolition and seeing issues with policing, but they felt that Keith's case was so egregious that it was like, no, we're filing this complaint. And the city of Baltimore said, in Liberia, you'd be like, ping. They ain't say not a thing. It was crickets. They were like, so these charges, someone gonna have to get them, right? So that's one of the ways. Another thing that we have been trying to get folks to understand in terms of this is like election season is coming up. Okay, about to ask for a new state's attorney. Okay,
bye Mosby.
Okay, it's time to buy Mosby. All right, get her off that.
Since she like that finger. For you,
Thank you. But it's time for her to go. Like it's time for us. I mean, once again, we know that none of us are invested in a prosecutor. None of us. I do not want that world. And at the same time, we still have to engage with that role here. And so what does it mean for us to organize around the fact that it's time to get her out of here, right? That she has caused, Marilyn Mosby is trying Black children as adults, y'all. Like if you go on Baltimore Court Watch, you can follow bail reviews. Anyone who has ever been in a bail review, that tells you more about what a prosecutor is doing than what they say on TV. And that's the other thing, like go on these bail review calls, y'all. Do court support, y'all. Like if we're really working we gotta be in the courtroom, because what we're seeing is like not only how many Keiths, but how many children, how many Black women, poor Black women who are being left in these COVID-filled prisons by Marilyn Mosby without a care. You're also seeing that the state's attorney's office is filled with nothing but racist white people who literally in bail reviews are showing their ass in terms of anti-Blackness. So how can we have a prosecutor who is the Black girl magic of the century at the same time hiring all of these racist ass ASAs who are up in bail reviews, basically like, fuck black people. I don't give a fuck about black people. And then she get on TV and she's like, let me tell you something about black people.
Yeah.
Crazy. So we don't have to. So those are other parts ways to report, right? Keep up with those things, because if we are continuing to chip at the systems and the functions, that's what allows Keith to be free. And then the last thing is, a lot of people are not used to organizing around judges. That is something we found with Keith's case. People were just like, well, what does this have to do with a judge? This has nothing to do with judges. And that is the place I want to urge people to organize around, because judges literally every day hold people's lives in their hands, and they are also a part of this system.
Right.
And they also must be responsible. The judge in Keith's case looked Keith's children, 2 children in their face, said, I have never in all my life seen children come up here like this to talk about their father. He looked Keith in the face and said, you don't even look like you should be here. He looked at us in the courtroom and said, I have never seen so many people show up consistently day by day. He looked at the motions and said, damn, the state really been fucking up. Y'all all right. And then he said, well, sorry, I'm not ruling in your favor. And here's like, it's just like, and so we showed up to the judge's house and said, and made a resounding call in Baltimore City that judges do not get to be anonymous. No, show up to your house because you showed up in our houses and you took our loved ones. So here we are. Pull up.
Yeah, and I want to highlight that you said court support, because that was the game changer for me as far as supporting Keith. I don't know what the hell I thought court was or what happened in the courtroom before Keith, but there was multiple times we were all almost put out from just the gasping alone. Like, what? Are you serious? Because the things that you hear in a courtroom is not like, Law and Order really messed me up because that is not how it goes at all. Like, to hear a judge be like, well, sorry, like, you know, like to hear that really amplified my support for Keith. Like, you know, I showed up because I was already in solidarity, but after that it was like, no, it's until it's backwards. Until he is home, I am committed, because I could not even believe, and it was continuous. It was like every time I went to court, every time I could steal some time away and go in there, it was always repeatedly some nonsense, like some real nonsense. But also I do want to say, like, join the organization, especially if you are in Baltimore City. You know, we showed yesterday that we are in full solidarity with one another. We are committed to building this network and to strengthening, organizing in not just Baltimore, but Maryland, because, you know, we got PG out here too. We have Anne Arundel County out here too. And it's all the same, you know, everything that gets dealt with as far as policing and policy work gets done in Anne Arundel County. And so the Black people in Annapolis are the first people that's like directly facing all of the BS, you know what I'm saying? So we especially Ujima, People's Progress, because it's a Maryland party, because it's a statewide party, we're really building these connections. And I think that we need to further build and further commit to joining organizations, because the message itself has expanded. You know, it's gone from just being about Keith to being about, this could be any one of us. And we could see that through Keith's case. And I think that that's the optics that we need to understand about Baltimore City and the surrounding areas, and just how politics is played here in general. Because Hogan ain't shit either as a governor, but all the Democrats, why is Hogan in office? Because Democrats refused to pick that Black man. Like, they were not going for it. Both times.
Look, let me tell y'all how Democrat, like, they have Baltimore City is a case to be studied. We had our run for Congress. Jill P. Carter ran for Congress against Kwame Nkrumah. Lord Jesus, let me never. Oh my God, Kwame Mfume, right? And here's what happened, y'all. Don't nobody in Baltimore City have ever seen that man. He don't come. He don't be here. He don't be in no. And when the results came back, who won? He won.
He did.
Even he was shocked. This man could not believe that he won.
He didn't have a team. Yeah, he didn't have a team or anything.
I live in Jill's district. I saw Jill campaigning. I saw Jill. You never saw that man anyway. That is the grasp. And guess who was at his who was at his celebration? Marilyn Mosby. She was tweeting congratulations. And right. I'm just this ruling black class, y'all going to hell.
But whose seat did he take? I think that's important too. Because that's a lot of the reason why he didn't even have to campaign. It's like name recognition. If you're taking Cummings' seat, he never campaigned at all. And so that's why I said Kim's. Yeah, I was going to say to Kim's. For whatever she is, as much of a mess as Kim is, at the very least she campaigned. At the very least she shook a hand or two, knocked on the door, said hello. He never was nowhere.
Man couldn't tell you nothing about Baltimore if you asked him, okay? He couldn't even tell you where you could get a good chicken box from. That's how you know. He don't care about
a chicken box.
Okay. Thank you for acknowledging that because it's real good. But I think lastly too, one of the things we've seen with Keith's case is also a call to Black journalists and Black media, because we have seen the ways in which Black journalists and Black media has also failed Keith and the fact of how they have been responding. And I think that is why I have to give honor and reverence to you all and to Black power ways in which. Welcome to the ways in which. Yeah, but we heard it. I don't let you cook. But I was like, take a shot. Hold on, let me. Okay, I can't get away from it. Okay, we're trying to abolish the ways in which, but I can't. But I cannot divest. But what we see is once again of what does that journalism look like? How do we build that up? That is an arm of this work and organizing that has to be built back up. We need Black media. We need Black journalism that is not concerned with the state, but actually the people. Because what you have is a situation where someone like April Ryan does an Instagram with the in the Instagram live, you have hundreds of people saying, ask them about Keith. How about Keith Davis Jr.? Do you know anything about Keith? Keith, tweeting her, email. She does not, and you can clearly see that they're seeing the messages because the Mosby's face is changing. You can look at them, you can kind of see that they're like, you see other people in the comments like, who is Keith? What are y'all talking about? And April Ryan does not acknowledge now one thing.
They turn off the chat.
They turn off the chat. You couldn't even say nothing in the chat, right? And so here you have where, in the same regard as they're ignoring Keith, they're saying, look at how great you are as a progressive prosecutor. Oh my God, tell you about these cases. And it's like, that is how Black media fails us, right? And so this is the call to journalists and so forth. Like, journalism is a role in liberation. It is an active role. Narrative creating and propaganda is part of the work. And if we don't have Black media and Black journalists that are creating propaganda for the people, you're creating propaganda for the state. And that means, baby, you my enemy. So now what we finna do here? I don't know.
Y'all, this has been so informative and so amazing. Thank you so much, Belfina and Erica, for informing us, enlightening us. And, as you say, till it's backwards, the struggle continues. And so I hope to have y'all again to give updates on the case. So thank you.
Thank y'all so much.
Hi, everybody. Sure you all know me by now. I am coming on to let you all know that I will be doing a feature segment for the rest of this season that may continue on into next season. And the segment is going to be called She Gathered Me. And today I just want to talk a little bit about what I'm thinking about for the segment and how I'm going to sort of move forward. So I guess the first place to start is where the name comes from. So I think many of you all have heard me say already that my mother passed away in 2018. She passed away in September of 2018. She was battling lupus and had a heart attack related to her lupus. And after my mother passed away, I've been struggling with a lot of things and figuring out how to make sense of it. And as I spent last year in Johannesburg, South Africa, I decided to get a tattoo, and I was trying to think about a tattoo that would honor my mother. And what I actually came up with is the quote, "She gathered me," from Toni Morrison's Beloved. And the reason why I came to this quote is because as a child, actually not just as a child, for over 20 years, my mother had a book club called Sister Chat with her friends, and they met monthly to read books, all different kinds of books, and generally, fellowship with one another. And so what I want to do first is read the passage that it comes from and then talk a little bit more about that. So this is towards the end of Beloved, right? This is after Beloved has disappeared. This is sort of the climax of the book, after the climax of the book. And Paul D and Seth are sitting talking to each other. And so she says, Paul D, he says, "What, baby?" "She left me." "Oh, girl, don't cry." She says, "She was my best thing." Paul D sits down in the rocking chair and examines the quilt patch in carnival colors. His hands are limp between his knees. There are too many things to feel about this woman. His head hurts. Suddenly, he remembers Sixo trying to describe what he felt about the 30-mile woman. What he felt was, "She is a friend of my mind. She gathered me. The pieces I am, she gathered them and give them back to me in all the right order. It's good, when you got a woman who is a friend of your mind." He's staring back at the quilt, but he is thinking about her wrought iron back, the delicious mouth still puffy at the corner from Ella's fist, the mean black eyes, the wet dress streaming before the fire. Her tenderness about his neck jewelry is 3 wands like attentive baby rattlers, curving 2 feet into the air. How she never mentioned or looked at it, so he did not have to feel the shame of being collared like a beast. Only this woman, Setha, could have left him his manhood like that. He wants to put his story next to hers. "Seth," he says, "me and you, we got more yesterdays than anybody. We need some kind of tomorrow." He leans over and takes her hand. With the other, he touches her face. "You, your best thing, Setha, you are." His holding fingers are holding hers. And she asks him, "Me?" What this quote sort of made me think about, and in particular, the sort of smaller bracketed quote, "She gathered me, man. The pieces I am, she gathered them and give them back to me in all the right order." So I ended up getting that particular tattoo on my arm here above this portrait of my mother. And one of the things that I wanted to think about with this segment, if you all watched Sharice and I's first segment together, I think it was episode 4, we had a conversation about what I was thinking about in terms of the concept of Pan-African feminism. And I wanted to take this segment as an opportunity to think about radical comradeship among women, among Black women, this concept of revolutionary love. I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of flesh out some of my ideas. And I'm sure actually at some point in time, Sharice and I have talked about these sort of different analytics and heuristics for thinking about the oppression of Black women. And, as a sort of framework, Sharice prefers triple oppression as a way of thinking about the way we experience oppression, which is not something that I disagree with. But as I said, I'm trying to articulate what I see as a sort of Pan-African feminism. And so over the course of these segments and in the future, I hope to think about the sort of nuanced differences between what womanists argue womanism is, what the sort of understanding of triple oppression is in relationship to other more mainstream ideas like intersectionality. I also hope to make this a space to actually talk about the practice of revolutionary love and sisterly comradeship. I hope to interview my mentors and teachers and friends and students, and for us to think about what it means to come to some sort of political understanding about the way we relate to one another. This past Valentine's Day is the first one I spent alone in a long time. And I actually spent the day reading this particular book, The Communism of Love. And one of the one of the things that comes up in the first couple of pages are two things that I, really spoke to me. And the first is this idea that love is a practice of relationality that is incommensurate with capitalist exchange relations. And the second, which is a sort of expansion of that notion, is that love activates a sensibility about being with people that is antithetical to capitalist reasons for being with others. And I was really happy to come across this because this is a book that was published just last year. Because when I was working on my dissertation, the final chapter in my dissertation is a chapter about revolutionary love. And in particular, it was a chapter thinking about the ways that we try to incorporate ideas of love into our radical and revolutionary practice. And also, again, in the ways that we relate to one another. And so that is, what I'm hoping to do, walk you all through some of my, lesser and more developed ideas in my research, the work that I'm doing with Afro-Venezuelan women, and as it expands. And, depending on the success of the segment, I hope to get some feedback, get some input from you all about what types of conversations you would like to see happen, what kinds of questions are circulating in your mind about, in particular, the sort of practice of relating to one another as Black women in a way that is beyond these sort of very commercialized notions of Black girl magic. This is not a Black girl magic segment. This is really a way of thinking about our socioeconomic conditions and predicament, and thinking about a particular a praxis of love, a praxis of revolutionary love. And so I am looking forward to spending the next couple of weeks with you all, and we'll see where it goes.
All right, y'all. So for this version of In These Tweets, we are going to do something a little bit different. We are going to mine the timeline of Black Power media because there's some good stuff on there, some interesting stuff, a lot of retweets, mostly retweets, but the good ones. And so, me and Jared will just pick some things we found interesting and discuss them. So first is this tweet that was retweeted from Kamau Franklin, who is one of what I call the daishikis. Those are the bosses of Black Power media. I call them daishikis because usually you say suits, right? But, daishikis, we Black, whatever. All right. All right, y'all. So Kamau said, one of the many problems with organizers in our community is that folks will compromise with the state all the time, but with each other, no compromise, no ability to build a national militant org because we happy with small formations as long as we the leader. And then, of course, the big homie Dev down there talk about they'll compromise with the state, corporations, developers, politicians, everything but community. And that just was a mic drop to me. Now, I don't want to speak too much out of turn because, as you know, I'm an academic that just recently joined an organization and got into organizing. But I think that this is true. I think that this is empirically true. I also think that it's true historically. That, and in fact, it's funny because I was reading this racial conditions report in the United States, whatever, the Raycon, and they themselves were critiquing Black leadership, that some of the informants, both Black and white, were saying that a lot of their leadership is very segmented and therefore it's ineffective. And that because of the different class positions and different orientations of different leaders and groups, that it was unclear as to who the leader of the Black community was. Anyway, and so that, people have been talking about this historically, apparently. And so it does seem like, it's smoke when it comes to working together as a community, but we'll take them grant dollars, we'll take that Ford money, whatever. And so I know it sounds hypocritical because we do go hard on the Black elite, on the niggerati, but this is not what we're talking about. There are formations that seem to be ideologically in sync, but then they have one or two issues, one or two principles that are not the same, and therefore it's smoke. And so what Kamau said really resonated with me. What do you think, Jared?
Absolutely. And I know he's been doing this for a long time. I've certainly seen it in my limited, involvement. And I joked before, that the epitome of it was, or often is, I should say, during African Liberation Day in DC, where you can go to like 5 different events all happening at the same time with like 10 people in each one, and the differences between them are negligible, if at all. I mean, they're just, or they're based on personality. So look, your point about not being hypocritical, look, I'm certainly guilty of all kinds of petty grievances and squabbles within this struggle. So I'll just point to myself and say, I got to do better, because I'm certainly less compromising with my enemies than I am with people I'm supposed to be working with. So I'll just point this at myself and say, I got to do better.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. I'm sure I do too. So.
And yeah, anyway, and the more people stay in this struggle, the more they'll be challenged to on that basis as well. But anyway, so for me, this one right here, again, a retweet on the Good BPM timeline, simple and to me quite profound. So in a response to someone calling out for a stop to stop calling landlords housing providers, someone else, East LA Revolutionary Action Party, went a step above and just said abolish them altogether. And I was
period.
Like,
yeah, to the point.
Because it says everything about the relationship we have in our society in terms of class, and certainly the specific issue of housing. So,
yeah,
out of here. Nobody should be houseless.
Nobody should be houseless. And you know what's so? I felt very ambivalent. I was reading something people were tweeting about how these sanitation workers were cutting up houseless people's tents, right? And they were calling them houseless neighbors. And on the one hand, it's like, okay, I agree with that these people are part of the community. But on the other hand, it's like, do not normalize fucking tents as acceptable dwellings. Like, I don't know. So I was conflicted about that. I understand the sentiment of solidarity, but it's also like, this is not sufficient. This is not adequate. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know.
No, that's a great point. That's a really good point. We can't be normalizing that kind of stuff for sure. So
period. For my next one, it is from another dashiki, Kalanji. Tag a freedom fighter, activist, or hip hop artist, or anyone else you like to see on the Remix Morning Show or on Black Power Media. Ready, go. And I was just intrigued by what people were dropping in here. Somebody named Richie Buzz tagged himself, which I thought was tacky, but that's cool.
Gotta do what you gotta do.
I don't know if you watched my show. Sorry. Noam Chomsky. Okay. Dr.
That's
Joy
Kamal's
James.
favorite white man. Yeah.
It is. Dr. Joy James, Black Socialist, Jail Law Speak. So there was just some interesting people, and I just liked this clarion call, because I would say between the squad, we're pretty good at getting people, and I think we've already had some amazing conversations across the platform. Absolutely. So I was intrigued by that. Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that. They got my guy a collar. I would love to get a collar. The British-based MC. He suggested he's a beast. So people got a lot of good suggestions in here for sure. And you're right. I think we do have a pretty good rate of they put no name on here. Of course, somebody's not paying close enough attention since she's been through. But right on, low key. All right, yeah. I see. It's good suggestions. Okay.
Yeah, and if you want to be on our show, tag yourself. Follow your boy Rich Buzz. Tag yourself, maybe you'll be on. Who knows?
All right, for my next one, this one got retweeted on the BPM timeline, and Dr. Yolanda Buka, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, but you spoke in just this week to my almost immediate heart. Like, we must have been, without knowing each other, on the exact same schedule, because she said here, when you submit a grant application 10 minutes late and you don't know if they'll take it, and then the very next tweet she follows up with, okay, the application will be reviewed. It's not my best work, but I tried. And I was just like, that is
solidarity, sis. Yeah.
Who wrote a couple grants this semester? How does the joke go? Who has 2 thumbs and wrote a couple grants? They're not so thrilled about this semester. This guy, like, I don't know, but I got him in. Listen. Anyway.
I feel like that's the story of so many academics' lives. It's like you get it in, you done at 11:58, it's due at midnight, then your internet fucks up, and you're like, oh my God, I submitted this at 12:07. Is they gonna take it? So,
and all of a sudden you start feeling like your students. You're like,
yep.
I promise you, I hit the send button. I promise you, it was in there. Anyway, so she was speaking my heart on that one.
Okay. All right, y'all. That's our short, sweet. In these tweets, looking at the BPM timeline, check it out. There's a lot of good information, a lot of good material on there. I'm not just saying that because I get retweeted a lot, but you know. All right, y'all. So for this segment of What I'm On, I want to just speak a little bit about working with my developmental editor. So what is a developmental editor, you ask? It means a whole bunch of shit, but it's basically somebody that you work with, and you can work with them at any stage of the book. Some people work with them on the front end where they're still conceptualizing the idea or working on their book proposal. So it's somebody that you pay essentially to help you develop your ideas, your content, your concept, your structure of your manuscript. I'm sure they do it for articles too, but I just know people who work with them for manuscripts. Now, for me, as y'all know, I hired mine on the back end. So I'm somebody that I need to have all my ideas laid out. I need to have my ideas solidified. I need to have all my own sources. And so I need to do the first pass myself. And so you remember Layla talked about how she's more dialogical and discursive in her practice. That ain't me. I need to sit down with myself, by myself. I mean, sometimes I talk to myself or record myself, literally walk around the block talking to myself out loud. But I need to have that first layer before I work with somebody else. But now, because of where I am in the text, I'm in Q4. It's go time. Now I am working with a developmental editor to just, there's some concepts that I'm not certain about or that I need guidance on where they need to be developed. And so let me just say, I hired him because he's written on Black radical history. He's written on Du Bois. And so I was initially going to go with somebody else, but I decided that I wanted somebody who really knows my content area, because also he will be able to fill in gaps in terms of the secondary literature. And so, for example, at first about the text, I was talking about the Black scare and the Red scare alongside anti-Blackness and anti-communism. But as I've been working through the text, I think I'm just going to use Black scare, Red scare, and leave anti-Blackness and anti-communism as theoretical frameworks out, and just talk about anti-Blackness as a function of the Black scare, or just use the concept of the Black scare instead of anti-Blackness because of the way anti-Blackness is so overdetermined by Afro-pessimism. And I'm doing something completely different in terms of arguing that it's a legitimating architecture. So anyway, so that's a sort of conversation that I would have with the developmental editor to be like, what do you think about this? If I'm going to use both of these concepts like Red scare and anti-communism, for example, what do I need to do to make sure that they're connected and linked? How do I make sure that they're distinct? If they're not distinct enough, why use both? And so those are the types of conversations that I'll have. As well, when I'm done with each chapter, I'll send it over to him. He'll look over it in terms of, actual both content editing and then also grammar, structure, that sort of thing. And then turn it around. He'll turn it around, and then I'll take his edits into account. It's possible that he will attend my manuscript workshop, but probably not participate because he'll have already given his feedback on the manuscript. So, one of the difficult things for me about working, I don't like feedback, y'all. I don't. Period. And it's interesting because I've been in lots of different working groups and all that stuff. But, I've workshopped my work, and I always have to give the preface, like, I don't like feedback. Like it puts me into defense mode. Right. And so I'm like, just don't pay attention to my face, because y'all know I can't control my facial expressions. My face has no indoor voice. And so working with the developmental editor is really pushing me to take feedback and to, and it's also, it's practice. The more you take it, the easier it becomes theoretically, but also to get my work out there. So there's also a sort of external accountability function to working with him, where it's like, if I tell him I'm gonna have this chapter done on Monday, I better have this shit done on Monday or have something to turn in. So it works in that way as well. But also, sometimes just sharing your shit is hard, especially like this. There's something in particular about a book that's so close to you. It's kind of like, it's like your baby. Sometimes it takes 9 months to write. I don't know. But like, it's like, it's so close. And the ideas, in my perspective, are so sort of original that if somebody's like, this is trash, of course, you're not going to take, you're not going to take that too kindly. But the good thing about it happening at this stage is that it can, a developmental editor can point out holes or things that are just incorrect, like dates or whatever, or just flaws in your argument, that, even if they disagree, you can anticipate what others are going to say. So we're having our first official meeting on Monday. So we had a meeting when we were trying to figure out if he was a good fit. I sent him like my proposal, a whole bunch of other materials, but we're having our first formal meeting on Monday. So, I'll let y'all know how it goes, keep you posted. But, if you're in academia, or even if you're not, and, you are thinking about having somebody who, can just work with you along the way, somebody to bounce ideas off of, somebody who can serve as external accountability. It's a thing. Developmental editors are a thing, and more people than actually work with them, both developmental editors and copy editors. So, it ain't cheap, but it can be worth it if that sounds like, something that would be conducive to either your writing style or to helping you put, your best ideas out there. So that's what I'm on for this week, y'all. But Jared, do you have any closing thoughts?
I do, starting with your face not having an inside voice.
Period.
It's so funny to me. But also, again, just deeply appreciate your writing advice. And again, another great show. Congratulations. Your conversation with Erica and Bilfina was outstanding and essential. So everybody needs to, of course, be supporting Keith Davis Jr. and all those incarcerated till it's backwards, and all political prisoners and everybody for that matter. So, and shout out to the fact that you surprised us with Dr. Brown's new segment. Can't wait to see more from her. It was a great start. So congratulations to her as well. This is dope.
Listen, by popular demand, I be seeing in the chats, y'all be like, especially for the Remix Morning Show, like, Dr. Layla, get a show. Where's Layla? More Dr. Layla. That's cool. That's my girl. But so, I was like, well, you got to give the people what they want. But anyway, y'all, that is our show for this Friday evening. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with me. So thanks for tuning in. I'm Dr. CBS. That is Doc Jab, and we are signing off.